The blood from her scraped palms had long since dried into dark crescents beneath her fingernails when Willa Montgomery finally stopped digging at the rocky ground with her bare hands. She sat back on her heels in the middle of nowhere, somewhere between Fort Sumner, New Mexico, and a dream that had died 3 days ago, staring at the shallow grave she had been trying to create for the last 2 hours. The sun beat down mercilessly on her back, and she realized with a strange detachment that she no longer cared if she lived or died in this God-forsaken stretch of desert. The wagon wheel had shattered on the 2nd day. Her husband had died on the 3rd. Between those 2 events lay a series of catastrophes that had stripped away everything she thought she understood about survival, about hope, about the future she had been promised when they left Missouri 6 weeks ago. Thomas had been sick before the wheel broke, fevered and delirious, but they had both believed he would recover. Then came the accident, the wagon tipping, the water barrels bursting open and soaking uselessly into the thirsty earth. By the time she had pulled Thomas from beneath the overturned wagon, he could barely speak. By morning, he was gone. She had tried to dig deep enough to keep the coyotes away from his body, but the ground here was unforgiving, studded with rocks and roots from the scattered mesquite trees. Her hands were raw, her dress torn, her bonnet lost somewhere in the chaos of the past 3 days. She had no more water, no more food, no more strength. The mule had broken free during the accident and disappeared into the wilderness, leaving her stranded with a dead husband, a broken wagon, and the slow realization that she was going to die out here too. The strange thing was how peaceful she felt about it now. The panic had burned itself out somewhere around dawn. The grief sat heavy in her chest, but even that felt distant, muffled by exhaustion and thirst. She looked at Thomas, wrapped in their wedding quilt because she had nothing else to cover him with, and felt a wave of sorrow so profound it left her hollow. 23 years old, married for 8 months, and this was how their story ended. Not in the fertile Oregon valleys they had dreamed about, not in a home surrounded by children and grandchildren, but here in the dust and heat, alone. She heard the horse before she saw the rider. The sound of hooves on hardpan drifted across the empty landscape, and she turned her head slowly, too tired to feel afraid. Let it be outlaws. Let it be hostile Apache. Let it be anything that would end this nightmare quickly. She watched as the lone rider crested the small rise to the east, silhouetted against the bright sky for a moment before urging his mount down toward her. He was a cowboy. She could tell that much from the way he sat his horse, from the wide-brimmed hat and the worn leather chaps. As he drew closer, she could make out more details. He was young, probably not much older than she was, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar and eyes that were startlingly blue even from a distance. He pulled his horse to a stop about 10 feet away and sat there for a long moment, taking in the scene. The overturned wagon, the body wrapped in the quilt, the woman sitting in the dirt with bloody hands and dead eyes. "Madam," he said finally, his voice rough but not unkind. He swung down from his horse with the easy grace of someone who had spent his entire life in the saddle. He was tall and lean, with the weathered look of someone who worked outdoors in all seasons. "Looks like you have had some trouble." Willa laughed, a harsh sound that surprised even her. "Trouble? Yes, I suppose you could call it that." Her voice came out cracked and dry, her throat raw from thirst and screaming into the wind yesterday when the reality of her situation had finally broken through her shock. The cowboy studied her for another moment, then walked back to his horse and pulled a canteen from his saddle. He approached slowly, like she was a spooked animal, and crouched down beside her. "You need to drink," he said, offering the canteen. She stared at it for a long moment, then reached out with shaking hands. The first swallow hurt, the water like fire down her parched throat, but she forced herself to drink slowly. He watched her carefully, and when she had taken several swallows, he gently took the canteen back. "Not too much at once," he said. "It will make you sick." She nodded, unable to speak past the tears that were suddenly streaming down her face. She had not cried since Thomas died, had not been able to find the tears, but now they came in hot, silent rivulets that left tracks through the dust on her cheeks. The cowboy did not try to stop her or offer false comfort. He simply sat down beside her in the dirt, his long legs stretched out in front of him, and waited. After several minutes, when her tears had slowed, he handed her a handkerchief from his pocket. It was clean, surprisingly white against the browns and tans of his clothing. "My name is Vincent Maddox," he said quietly. "I work for the Double T Ranch about 15 miles north of here. I was tracking a couple of strays when I spotted your wagon from the ridge." "Willa Montgomery," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. She used his handkerchief to wipe her face, though she suspected she was just smearing the dirt around. "My husband is Thomas, was Thomas." She gestured toward the quilt-wrapped form. Vincent looked at the body, then at the shallow grave she had been trying to dig, then back at her face. "How long ago?" "Yesterday morning, maybe the morning before, I am not sure anymore." She felt the hysteria bubbling up again and forced it down. "The wagon broke. The water spilled. He was already sick. It all happened so fast. And you have been trying to bury him yourself." It was not a question. Vincent stood up, surveying the area with a practiced eye. "The ground is too hard here, too many rocks. We will need to find a better spot." He paused, seeming to consider his words carefully. "I can help you if you will let me." Willa looked up at him, this stranger who had appeared like something out of a fever dream. "Why would you do that?" Something flickered across his face, there and gone too quickly for her to identify. "Because it is the right thing to do. Because nobody should have to do this alone." He extended his hand to her. "Come on, let me help you up. We have work to do before the sun gets much higher." She took his hand, his grip warm and solid and real, and let him pull her to her feet. Her legs nearly buckled, and he steadied her with a hand on her elbow. "When did you last eat?" "I do not remember." He nodded, as if he had expected that answer, and guided her to the shade of the overturned wagon. "Sit here. I am going to see what I can salvage from your supplies, then we will take care of your husband." He gave her the canteen again. "Small sips. I will be right back." Willa watched as he moved around the wreckage of her life, his movements efficient and unhurried. He found the small bag of hardtack that had survived the accident, a can of peaches that had rolled under the wagon bed, a blanket that was dusty but intact. He brought them to her, opened the peaches with a knife from his belt, and handed her the can with a fork he produced from his saddlebag. "Eat," he said. It was not a command exactly, but there was an expectation in his voice that made her obey. She managed half the can before her stomach protested, and he nodded approvingly. "That is good. That is a start." He took a long drink from his own canteen, then looked toward the body again. "There is a spot about a quarter-mile west, near a stand of cottonwoods. The ground is softer there, near the old creek bed. We can give him a proper burial." He turned back to her, and his blue eyes were kind but direct. "Can you ride?" "I have not been on a horse in years, but yes, I can ride." "Good. You will ride with me. We will come back for what we can carry from your wagon after, but first we take care of your husband." The next hours passed in a blur of heat and effort and strange, quiet companionship. Vincent was true to his word about the cottonwood grove. The ground there was indeed softer, shadowed and almost cool compared to where her wagon had crashed. He dug the grave himself, refusing her offer to help, working steadily with a small folding shovel he carried in his saddlebag. She sat in the shade and watched, trying to make sense of this turn of events. When the grave was deep enough, Vincent rode back to the wagon and returned with Thomas's body cradled carefully across his saddle. Together, they lowered him into the earth, and Willa said what prayers she could remember from her childhood, her voice breaking on the words. Vincent stood beside her with his hat over his heart, silent and respectful, and when she finished, he helped her shovel the dirt back into the grave. They piled rocks over the top to discourage animals, and Vincent produced a piece of wood from somewhere and used his knife to carve Thomas's name and the year into it. 1877, he said as he worked. A hard year for a lot of people. Willa sank down beside the grave when they were finished, physically and emotionally exhausted. Vincent sat down beside her, not too close, but close enough that she felt less alone. They sat in silence for a long time, the only sounds the whisper of wind through the cottonwood leaves and the occasional call of a bird. "I was going to give up," Willa said finally, the words coming out before she could stop them. "Before you came. I was going to lay down beside him and just let it end. I did not see the point in fighting anymore." Vincent was quiet for a moment, his hands resting loosely on his knees, his gaze fixed on some distant point on the horizon. "I know that feeling," he said at last. "I know it better than you might think." She turned to look at him, really look at him for the first time. In the dappled shade of the cottonwoods, she could see the lines around his eyes that spoke of squinting into too many sunrises, the old scar that ran along his jaw, the careful way he held himself, as if something inside him was still healing. 3 years ago, Vincent began, his voice low and measured, "I was married too. Her name was Catherine. She was the prettiest thing I had ever seen, with red hair and green eyes and a laugh that could light up a whole room." He picked up a small stone and turned it over in his fingers, not looking at Willa. "We had a little place south of Santa Fe, nothing much, just a cabin and some land we were trying to work. She was pregnant with our first child." Willa felt her breath catch, already anticipating the tragedy in his story. "There was a raid," Vincent continued, his voice flat now, emotionless in that way people get when they are trying to hold themselves together. "Outlaws, not Indians like folks tried to claim later. Just men who thought they could take what they wanted. I was out checking on the cattle when I heard the shots, by the time I got back to the cabin." He stopped, his jaw working. "They killed her, killed them both, and I got there just in time to see it happen and not be able to stop it." "Vincent," Willa whispered, horror and sympathy washing through her. He shook his head, cutting off whatever she had been about to say. "I buried them on that land. Then I burned the cabin to the ground and walked away. For 6 months I did not care if I lived or died. I took the most dangerous jobs I could find, rode into situations that should have gotten me killed a dozen times over. I was looking for a reason to die, but I was too much of a coward to just pull the trigger myself." "What changed?" she asked quietly. "An old rancher named Tom Hutchinson. He owned the Double T, still does. He found me half dead from a beating I took in a bar fight in Albuquerque. I had insulted the wrong man's brother, said things that I knew would get me hurt, hoping this would be the time it went far enough." Vincent finally looked at her, and his eyes were haunted. "Tom took me back to his ranch, put me to work, and told me that my wife and baby did not die so I could throw my life away. He said the only way to honor their memory was to live, really live, and maybe find a way to help somebody else along the way." Willa felt tears sliding down her cheeks again. "And that is why you stopped for me." "That is why I stopped for you," he confirmed. "Because 3 years ago, I would have given anything for someone to sit beside me and tell me that it gets easier to breathe, that the weight in your chest does not go away, but you get stronger carrying it." that there is still life worth living on the other side of this darkness. They sat together in the shade, two people who had looked into the abyss and somehow found themselves pulled back from the edge. Willa felt something shift inside her, not hope exactly, but maybe the possibility of hope. The shape of a future that did not end here in the desert. "What happens now?" she asked. "I have nothing. No money, no supplies, nowhere to go." Vincent stood up and offered her his hand again, pulling her to her feet. "Now I take you back to the Double T. Tom and his wife Martha are good people. They will give you a place to stay while you figure out what comes next. We have a cook who can always use help, and Martha has been talking about needing someone to help with the household accounts. You can read and write. Yes, I was a teacher before I married Thomas. Then there you go. You will earn your keep and have time to decide what you want to do. Head back east, stay in New Mexico, whatever feels right." He walked toward his horse, then turned back to look at her. "But no more giving up. You promise me that. Whatever comes, you fight for it." Willa looked at the grave, at the simple wooden marker, at the life she had thought she would have lying buried beneath the rocks and earth. Then she looked at Vincent, at this cowboy who had appeared when she needed someone most, who had shared his own pain to pull her back from the brink of despair. "I promise," she said. The ride to the Double T Ranch took most of the day, with a stop back at the wagon to salvage what little remained of Willa's possessions. A carpetbag with her clothes, Thomas's watch, their Bible, a few other personal items. Everything else they left behind, including the broken wagon. Vincent said he would send some men back to see if any of the wood could be salvaged, but the wagon itself was a total loss. Willa rode behind Vincent on his horse, her arms around his waist, her cheek pressed against his back. She could feel the steady rhythm of his breathing, the warmth of his body through his shirt, and it grounded her, kept her tethered to this world when part of her still wanted to slip away into nothingness. He was patient with her, stopping several times to let her rest and drink water, never pushing too hard or too fast. As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, they crested a rise, and Willa saw the Double T spread out below them. It was larger than she had expected, a sprawling ranch house with a wide porch, several outbuildings, corrals filled with horses, and in the distance, cattle dotting the grassland. Smoke rose from the chimney, and she could see people moving about in the yard, going about the business of the day's end. "It is not fancy," Vincent said over his shoulder, "but it is home. Tom and Martha have been running this place for 30 years. They never had children of their own, so they have a habit of taking in strays." There was a hint of warmth in his voice when he spoke of them, affection and respect. As they rode down toward the ranch, a door opened and a woman stepped out onto the porch, shielding her eyes against the setting sun. She was in her 50s, Willa guessed, with gray-streaked brown hair pulled back in a practical bun and the capable look of someone who had spent a lifetime managing a household in the wilderness. "Vincent Maddox, where have you been?" the woman called out as they approached. "You were supposed to be back hours ago, and supper is getting cold." Then she seemed to notice that Vincent had a passenger, and her expression shifted to one of concern. "Who is this?" Vincent dismounted and turned to help Willa down, his hands gentle on her waist as he lifted her from the horse. Her legs were shaky after the long ride, and she had to steady herself against the horse's flank for a moment. "Martha, this is Willa Montgomery. I found her out past the Badlands. Her wagon broke down, her husband died, and she was stranded." Vincent kept his explanation simple and direct. "She needs help." Martha came down the porch steps immediately, her face softening with sympathy. "Oh, you poor dear, come inside right now. You look about ready to drop." She put an arm around Willa's shoulders, supporting her weight, and began guiding her toward the house. "Vincent, get Tom. He will want to know about this. And put your horse away properly before you come in." "Yes, madam," Vincent said, and Willa caught the small smile on his face as Martha bustled her away. Inside, the ranch house was warm and smelled like coffee and beef stew and fresh bread. Martha sat Willa down at a large wooden table in the kitchen and immediately set about making her comfortable. A bowl of stew appeared in front of her, thick with vegetables and meat. Fresh bread with butter. More water, and this time a cup of coffee too, strong and hot and exactly what she needed. "You eat," Martha commanded gently. "Then we will get you cleaned up and into bed. Everything else can wait until tomorrow." Willa obeyed, too tired to do anything else, and by the time Tom Hutchinson came in with Vincent trailing behind him, she was halfway through the bowl of stew and beginning to feel almost human again. Tom was exactly what Willa had expected after hearing Vincent's description. A big man, probably in his late 50s, with weathered skin and kind eyes and hands that bore the calluses of a lifetime of hard work. He pulled out a chair and sat down across from Willa, studying her face with the assessing gaze of someone who had seen a lot of suffering in his time. "Vincent tells me you have had a rough few days," he said quietly. "That is one way to put it," Willa replied, managing a weak smile. "Well, you are safe here. You can stay as long as you need, no questions asked and no debts owed." Tom glanced at his wife, who nodded firmly. "Martha and I have plenty of room, and Lord knows there is always work to be done around here if you feel inclined to help out. But first things first. You rest, you heal, and you take all the time you need to grieve." The kindness in his words, in both their words, broke something loose inside Willa. She put down her spoon with a shaking hand and covered her face, the tears coming again, but different this time. Not the desperate, empty tears of earlier, but something that felt almost like relief. Like maybe, just maybe, she was going to survive this after all. Martha came around the table and wrapped her arms around Willa, making soft, soothing sounds, and Vincent and Tom quietly left the kitchen to give them privacy. Willa cried until she had no tears left, and Martha held her through all of it, this stranger who had opened her home and her heart without hesitation. Later, after Martha had helped her wash and given her a clean nightgown and tucked her into a real bed in a small, neat room that smelled of lavender, Willa lay in the darkness and listened to the sounds of the ranch settling in for the night. Horses moving in the corral. Men's voices calling goodnight to each other. The distant yip of a coyote somewhere out in the desert. She thought about Thomas, about their short marriage and the dreams they had shared. She thought about how quickly everything could change, how fragile life really was. And she thought about Vincent, about the story he had shared with her, about the fact that he had survived his own devastating loss, and somehow found a way to keep going. As she drifted off to sleep, exhausted in body and soul, her last conscious thought was that maybe Tom was right. Maybe the only way to honor the dead was to keep living. The days that followed developed a rhythm. Willa helped Martha with the household tasks, finding comfort in the simple, repetitive work. Cooking, cleaning, mending clothes, keeping the accounts for the ranch supplies. Martha was easy to work with, never prying but always ready with a kind word or a cup of tea when the grief became too heavy. Tom was often out with the men, managing the cattle operation, but when he was around, he treated Willa with the gentle respect one might show a convalescent, someone still recovering from a serious illness. Vincent was harder to pin down. He was out on the range most days, working with the other ranch hands, and when he was at the ranch, he seemed to keep his distance from Willa. Not unfriendly exactly, but careful. He would nod to her when their paths crossed, ask politely how she was settling in, but he never sought her out or tried to continue the connection they had formed that first day. It bothered her more than she wanted to admit. She found herself looking for him, listening for his voice among the other cowboys, watching from the kitchen window when the men gathered in the yard in the evenings. There was something about him, something beyond gratitude for his rescue, that drew her attention. Maybe it was the shared understanding of loss. Maybe it was the way he moved, quiet and self-contained, like he was always holding something back. Maybe it was simply that he had been the first person to show her kindness in her darkest moment, and some part of her had imprinted on that like a lost animal finding shelter. 2 weeks after her arrival at the Double T, Martha sent her out to the bunkhouse with a basket of mending that some of the men had requested. It was early evening, the sun just starting to set, and most of the hands were gathered outside, cleaning tack and sharing stories from the day. They were respectful when she approached, tipping their hats and thanking her for the mending, but she could feel them being careful around her, this widow who had appeared out of nowhere with tragedy written all over her. Vincent was sitting apart from the others, oiling a saddle with focused attention. Willa found herself walking over to him, the empty basket hanging from her arm. "Hello," she said, and he looked up, surprise flickering across his face. "Evening, Mrs. Montgomery. Do you need something?" "I wanted to thank you," she said. "Properly thank you for everything you did, for saving my life, for bringing me here. I have not really had a chance to say it." Vincent set down the rag he had been using and stood up, wiping his hands on his pants. "You do not need to thank me. Anyone would have done the same." "No," Willa said firmly, "they would not have, and even if they would have, you did. That matters." He studied her face for a long moment, and she saw something complicated move through his expression. "How are you doing, really?" "Some days are better than others," she admitted. "I wake up and forget for just a second, and then I remember, and it is like losing him all over again. But then there are moments where I can breathe without it hurting, where I can almost imagine a future that does not end in that desert." "Those moments are getting longer," Vincent nodded slowly. "That is how it goes. The space between the waves gets wider, they still hit you but not as often." He paused, seeming to wrestle with something. "I am glad you are healing. Martha says you have been a big help around the house." "I like having something to do, something that matters." Willa shifted the basket to her other arm. "Vincent, can I ask you something? All right. Why have you been avoiding me?" He had the grace to look uncomfortable. "I have not been avoiding you." "Yes, you have. You barely speak to me unless I speak to you first. You leave rooms when I enter them. If I did not know better, I would think I had done something to offend you." Vincent sighed and ran a hand through his hair. "You have not done anything wrong. I just thought it would be easier for both of us to keep some distance." "Easier for who?" Willa asked, and there was a sharpness to her voice that surprised even her. "Because it does not feel easier to me. It feels like the one person who understands what I am going through is treating me like a stranger." "Willa." He said her first name for the first time, and something about hearing it in his voice made her breath catch. "You just lost your husband. You are grieving. The last thing you need is—" "Is what?" she pressed when he trailed off. He met her eyes, and the intensity in his gaze made her take a step back. "Is me complicating things? Is developing feelings that have no business existing yet? Is crossing lines that should not be crossed?" The air between them suddenly felt charged, electric. Willa's heart was hammering in her chest, and she realized with a start that she understood exactly what he meant. Because she felt it too, this pull, this connection that went beyond gratitude or shared trauma. She had been feeling it for days, maybe since that first day, and she had been trying to ignore it, to tell herself it was just her grief making her latch onto her rescuer. But looking at Vincent now, seeing the way he was looking at her, she knew it was more than that. "I am not asking you to cross any lines," she said quietly. "I am just asking you to be my friend, to not shut me out because you are afraid of what might happen." Vincent was quiet for a long moment, and she could see the war playing out in his expression. Finally, he nodded. "Friends." "I can do that." "Good," Willa said, and she surprised herself by reaching out and touching his hand briefly. "Because I could really use a friend right now." His hand turned under hers, his fingers squeezing gently for just a second before letting go. "Then that is what I will be." After that conversation, things shifted. Vincent stopped avoiding her, and they fell into an easy companionship. He would come up to the house in the evenings after the work was done, and they would sit on the porch with Tom and Martha, talking about the ranch, about the weather, about anything and nothing. Sometimes Vincent would tell stories from his time working various ranches across New Mexico and Arizona, and his dry sense of humor would have Willa laughing until her sides hurt, the sound strange and precious after weeks of grief. Other times, when Tom and Martha had gone to bed and they were left alone in the cool night air, the conversations would turn more serious. They talked about loss and survival, about faith and doubt, about the strange paths that had brought them both to this place. Vincent told her more about Catherine, about their brief marriage and the dreams they had shared. Willa told him about Thomas, about how they had met at a church social in Missouri, about his enthusiasm for the West and her own quiet reservations that she had pushed aside because she loved him. "Do you think you will stay?" Vincent asked one night in late June, about 6 weeks after Willa had arrived at the Double T. They were sitting on the porch steps, watching heat lightning flicker on the distant horizon. "Or will you go back east?" Willa considered the question carefully. "I do not know. Part of me thinks I should go back, find my family, try to rebuild the life I left behind. But another part of me feels like that person does not exist anymore. The girl who left Missouri died in that desert along with her husband. I am someone different now." "You are," Vincent agreed. "Grief changes us. It burns away parts of who we were and leaves something new behind. The question is whether you like who you are becoming." She turned to look at him, his profile sharp against the darkening sky. "I think I do. I am stronger than I thought I was. More capable. I survived something I did not think I could survive, and I am still here." She paused. "What about you? Do you like who you have become?" Vincent was quiet for a long moment. "I am getting there. For a long time I hated myself for surviving when Catherine and the baby did not. I kept thinking I should have been there, should have protected them, should have died with them if I could not save them. But Tom helped me see that survival is not something to be ashamed of. It is just what happens sometimes. Some of us live, and we owe it to the ones who did not to make that life mean something. Is that what you are doing? Making your life mean something?" He turned to meet her eyes, and the intensity was back, that spark that seemed to ignite whenever they got too close to certain truths. "I am trying. Some days are better than others." Willa felt her pulse quicken. They were crossing into dangerous territory again, that space where friendship started to blur into something else. She knew she should pull back, should change the subject, should remember that Thomas had been dead for less than 2 months, and she had no business thinking about another man the way she was thinking about Vincent. But she did not pull back. Instead, she said, "Vincent, can I tell you something?" "Anything?" "I feel guilty. Not because I am not sad about Thomas, because I am. I miss him. I grieve for him every day, but I also feel." She struggled to find the right words. "I feel alive. For the first time in a long time, maybe ever, I feel like I am exactly where I am supposed to be. And I feel guilty for feeling that way when my husband is barely cold in his grave." Vincent reached out and took her hand, his grip warm and firm. You do not have anything to feel guilty about. Life is for the living, Willa. Thomas would not want you to bury yourself with him. How do you know? She asked, tears pricking her eyes. Because anyone who loved you would want you to be happy. That is what love is. They sat like that for a long time, hands linked, watching the lightning dance across the sky. Neither of them quite willing to name what was growing between them, but both of them aware of it, present and undeniable. The summer wore on, hot and dry, with occasional thunderstorms that brought relief and turned the desert briefly green. Willa settled more fully into life at the Double T, taking on more responsibilities and becoming an integral part of the household. Martha taught her how to preserve food for the winter, how to treat common ailments and injuries, how to manage the complex logistics of feeding and caring for a household of ranch hands. Tom taught her about cattle and horses, about reading the land and the weather, about the business side of ranching. And Vincent taught her how to live again. They rode out together when he could spare time from his work, Vincent showing her the boundaries of the ranch, the water sources, the places where wildlife gathered. He taught her to shoot, patiently correcting her stance and her aim until she could hit a tin can from 20 paces. He brought her books from Fort Sumner when he went to town for supplies, remembering that she had been a teacher and guessing correctly that she missed reading. The other ranch hands noticed, of course. Willa could feel them watching, speculating, but no one said anything unkind. If anything, they seemed pleased, as if Vincent's gradual return to life was something they had all been hoping for. Martha noticed too. One evening in late July, as Willa was helping her prepare supper, Martha said casually, "Vincent is a good man." "He is," Willa agreed, keeping her eyes on the potatoes she was peeling. "He has not been truly happy since Catherine died. Alive, yes. Functional, yes. But not happy." Willa set down the knife and looked at Martha. "Are you trying to tell me something?" Martha smiled, her eyes kind. "I am just saying that I have seen the way he looks at you, and I have seen the way you look at him. And I think if two people who have both survived hell can find some happiness together, they should not let propriety or fear or guilt stand in their way." "It has only been 3 months since Thomas died," Willa said quietly. "I know, and I am not suggesting you rush into anything, but I am also not suggesting you run away from something that could be good and right and healing for both of you." Martha put her hand over Willa's. "There are no rules for grief, dear. No timeline that says when it is acceptable to start living again. Trust your heart. It will tell you when you are ready." That conversation stayed with Willa, rolling around in her thoughts as the days passed. She found herself paying closer attention to her feelings, trying to untangle the complicated knot of grief and guilt and growing affection for Vincent. She still thought about Thomas, still felt the ache of his loss, but it was different now. The sharp, devastating pain had softened into a chronic sadness, something she carried with her but that no longer threatened to pull her under, and her feelings for Vincent were becoming impossible to ignore. It was not just gratitude or the bond of shared trauma. It was the way he made her laugh. The way he listened when she talked, really listened, like her words mattered. The way he looked at her when he thought she was not paying attention, with a tenderness that made her heart skip. The way her whole body came alive when he was near, every nerve ending suddenly alert and aware. The first time he kissed her, it was an accident. They were in the barn on a Sunday afternoon in early August. Willa had come looking for him to ask if he wanted to ride out to the creek, and she found him in one of the stalls, treating a cut on a horse's leg. She stood watching him work, admiring the gentle competence of his hands, and when he finished and stood up, he turned and nearly collided with her. His hands came up to steady her, gripping her arms, and suddenly they were standing impossibly close, close enough that she could see the darker blue ring around his irises, close enough to feel the heat radiating from his body. Time seemed to slow, the moment stretching out, and then Vincent was lowering his head and his lips were brushing against hers, soft and tentative and questioning. Willa's eyes fluttered closed and she leaned into the kiss, her hands coming up to rest against his chest. For just a second they stood like that, barely moving, the kiss chaste and sweet and full of all the things they had not yet said to each other. Then Vincent pulled back abruptly, his eyes wide with something like panic. "I am sorry. I should not have done that. I had no right." "Vincent," Willa started, but he was already backing away, shaking his head. "I need to go. I have work to finish." He practically fled the barn, leaving Willa standing alone in the dusty shaft of sunlight, her fingers pressed to her lips, her heart racing. He avoided her for the next 2 days, and Willa felt like she was going insane. She replayed the kiss over and over in her mind, analyzing every second of it, trying to figure out if she had done something wrong, if she had misread the situation, if Vincent regretted it. By the 3rd day she was done with patience. She found him out by the corrals after supper and marched up to him with determination written all over her face. "We need to talk," she said firmly. Vincent looked around nervously, but there was no one else nearby. "Willa, I already apologized." "I do not want an apology. I want to know why you kissed me and then ran away like I had done something terrible." He closed his eyes briefly. "Because it was wrong. You are grieving. You are vulnerable. I took advantage of that and I hate myself for it." "You did not take advantage of me," Willa said, her voice rising slightly. "I am a grown woman, Vincent. I know my own mind, and if I did not want you to kiss me, I would have pulled away." He opened his eyes and looked at her, really looked at her, searching her face. "Willa, I cannot be just a distraction from your grief. I cannot be the thing you cling to because you are lonely. I have been through that, with women who saw me as a way to feel something, anything, after their own losses. I will not do that again. Is that what you think this is?" She felt anger flaring hot in her chest. "You think I am using you?" "I do not know what to think," Vincent said honestly. "All I know is that I have feelings for you that go way beyond friendship, and that scares the hell out of me. Because what if you do not really feel the same way? What if you just think you do because I rescued you, because I have been kind to you, because you are not ready to be alone? What if 6 months from now you wake up and realize you made a mistake?" Willa stepped closer to him, close enough that he had to look down to meet her eyes. "And what if 6 months from now I wake up next to you and know that you are the best thing that ever happened to me? What if this is real, Vincent? What if it is not about grief or gratitude or loneliness, but about 2 people who found each other when they both needed someone most? What if we are both too scared to take a chance on something good because we are afraid of losing again?" Vincent's jaw worked, and she could see the war in his eyes. "I cannot lose someone else, Willa. I cannot go through that again." "Then do not," she said simply. "Choose to believe we are going to make it. Choose to believe this is worth the risk." She reached up and cupped his face with her hands, her touch gentle. "I am falling in love with you, Vincent Maddox. Maybe I already have fallen. And I am terrified too, because loving someone means giving them the power to hurt you. But I would rather take that risk with you than spend the rest of my life playing it safe and being alone." For a long moment, Vincent just stood there, his eyes searching hers, and Willa could practically see him weighing her words, measuring them against his fear. Then, slowly, he reached up and covered her hands with his own, turning his head to press a kiss to her palm. "I am falling in love with you too," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "God help me, I think I started falling the moment I saw you sitting in that desert, refusing to give up even when you thought you had no reason to keep fighting." "Then stop running from me," Willa whispered. Stop pushing me away because you are afraid. I do not know how to do this, Vincent admitted. I do not know how to let myself care again without waiting for everything to fall apart. Then we will figure it out together, one day at a time. No promises except to be honest with each other, to not hide what we are feeling. She smiled, small but real. And maybe we start with another kiss because that first one ended way too soon. Vincent laughed, the sound surprised and genuine, and then he was pulling her close and kissing her properly this time. Not tentative or questioning, but deep and real and full of all the longing they had both been holding back. Willa melted into him, her arms wrapping around his neck, his hands spanning her waist, and for the first time since Thomas died, she felt something other than grief. She felt joy. She felt desire. She felt alive. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Vincent rested his forehead against hers. "This is real," he said, like he was testing the words. "This is happening." "Yes," Willa agreed, smiling against his lips. "This is happening." They kept their relationship relatively quiet at first, not because they were ashamed, but because they both wanted time to figure out what they were to each other without the weight of everyone else's expectations. But Tom and Martha knew, of course. It was impossible to hide the way they looked at each other now, the casual touches when they thought no one was watching, the fact that Vincent started showing up at the main house more often and staying later. Tom pulled Vincent aside one evening and had what Vincent later described as a very awkward but surprisingly touching conversation about intentions and respect, and the fact that if Vincent hurt Willa, Tom would take it personally. Vincent had assured him that his intentions were entirely honorable, that he cared deeply for Willa, and had no plans to do anything that might harm her or her reputation. Martha, being Martha, was more direct. She cornered Willa in the kitchen and asked straight out if Vincent was treating her right. When Willa assured her that he was patient and kind and respectful, Martha had nodded with satisfaction and said, "Good. That boy deserves some happiness, and so do you." By September, as the heat of summer started to break and the nights became cooler, Willa and Vincent had settled into a rhythm. They were courting, in the old-fashioned sense of the word, spending time together, getting to know each other not as two broken people sharing their pain, but as two whole people building something new. They rode out together to check on cattle, had long conversations about books and politics and dreams for the future, stole kisses in quiet corners when they could. Vincent was different with her than he had been those first few weeks. The careful distance was gone, replaced by an openness that made Willa's heart ache with tenderness. He told her about his childhood in Texas, about losing his parents young and being raised by an uncle who taught him to cowboy. He told her about his fears and his hopes, about the ranch he wanted to own someday, about his belief that love was worth risking everything for, even when it was terrifying. Willa told him about her own past, about growing up in Missouri with 3 sisters, about becoming a teacher because she loved learning, about marrying Thomas not because of some grand passion, but because he had been kind and steady and offering her a different kind of life than the one she had known. She told him that she had cared for Thomas, had grieved for him honestly, but that what she felt for Vincent was different, deeper, more consuming. With Thomas, it was comfortable, she tried to explain one afternoon as they sat by the creek, their boots off and their feet in the cool water. "I felt safe with him, protected, but I did not feel alive the way I feel with you. Every moment with you is vivid and bright, like I have been living my whole life in shades of gray and suddenly discovered color." Vincent had pulled her close and kissed her temple. "I know exactly what you mean. Catherine was my first love, and what I felt for her was young and hopeful and untested by real hardship. What I feel for you has been forged in fire. We both know what loss feels like, what it costs to love someone, and we are choosing it anyway. That makes it different, stronger. Do you think Catherine would approve? Willa asked, then immediately wished she could take the question back. I am sorry. You do not have to answer that. But Vincent was quiet for a moment, considering. I think she would want me to be happy. To have a family, to build a life, all the things we talked about. And I think she would like you. He smiled sadly. You are both stubborn and brave and too smart for your own good. Willa rested her head on his shoulder, feeling the steady rise and fall of his breathing. I hope Thomas would understand too. I hope he would not think I forgot him too quickly. You have not forgotten him. You will never forget him. But remembering someone and moving forward with your own life are not mutually exclusive. Vincent's arm tightened around her. Love does not work like there is only so much to go around. The heart just gets bigger to make room. As fall deepened, turning the cottonwoods gold and bringing cooler winds down from the mountains, Vincent started talking about the future more concretely. About finding a piece of land of his own, maybe something adjacent to the Double T. About building a house, starting a small herd. About having a family someday, children who would grow up with the freedom of the West and the love of two parents who had fought their way through darkness to find each other. I want that with you, he said one evening as they sat on the porch, wrapped in a blanket against the chill. If you will have me. I know it has not been that long, and I know people will talk, but I also know what I feel, and I do not want to waste any more time being afraid of what might happen. I want to start living. Willa turned to look at him, her heart full to bursting. Are you asking me to marry you, Vincent Maddox? I guess I am, he said, a nervous smile tugging at his lips. I do not have a ring yet, and this is probably the worst proposal in the history of proposals, but yes. I am asking you to marry me, to build a life with me, to take a chance on a beat-up cowboy who loves you more than he thought he would ever love anyone again. Willa laughed, tears streaming down her face, and threw her arms around his neck. Yes. Yes, of course, yes. I want all of that. I want everything with you. They were married in late October, in a simple ceremony at the ranch with Tom and Martha standing as witnesses and a circuit preacher who happened to be passing through Fort Sumner. Willa wore a new dress that Martha had helped her make, pale blue with white lace at the collar. Vincent wore his best shirt and pants, his hair neatly combed and his face clean shaven. They exchanged vows under the cottonwoods, where Willa had buried Thomas 5 months earlier, a deliberate choice that felt like a circle closing, like permission granted to move forward. The small gathering of ranch hands who attended hooted and hollered when Vincent kissed his bride, and Tom produced a bottle of whiskey for toasting. Martha cried happy tears and hugged them both so hard, Vincent joked that she was going to crack his ribs. It was simple and perfect, and exactly what they both needed. Tom had a surprise for them. As a wedding gift, he deeded them 100 acres on the western edge of the Double T, land with good water and grass, enough to start a small ranching operation of their own while Vincent continued to work for Tom. Every man needs his own place, Tom said gruffly, embarrassed by his own generosity. And you two have earned it. They spent the winter planning and preparing, Vincent working with the other hands to build a cabin on their new land while Willa continued helping Martha at the main house. The cabin was small but well built, with a bedroom, a main room with a fireplace, and a loft for storage. Vincent made the furniture himself, working late into the night to craft a bed frame, a table, chairs, shelves for Willa's books. They moved into their cabin in early January of 1878, and Willa stood in the doorway of their home, looking out at the land that was now theirs, and felt a contentment she had never imagined possible. Vincent came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist, resting his chin on her shoulder. "What are you thinking?" he asked. "I am thinking about how strange life is. How a year ago I was married to a different man, living a completely different life, heading toward a future that does not exist anymore. And now I am here with you, and it feels more right than anything has ever felt. Do you ever regret it? Not Thomas specifically, but the path that brought you here." Willa turned in his arms to face him. "How can I regret the path that led me to you? Yes, there was pain. Yes, there was loss. But I would walk through that desert 1,000 times if it meant ending up here in this moment with you." Vincent kissed her, slow and deep, and then swept her up into his arms, carrying her over the threshold of their new home while she laughed and protested that she could walk perfectly well on her own. He set her down gently in front of the fireplace, where a fire was already burning, warming the small space. "Welcome home, Mrs. Maddox," he said softly. "Welcome home," she echoed and kissed him again. Their first year of marriage was everything Willa had hoped for and more. They worked hard, building their herd, improving their land, learning the rhythms of life together. There were challenges, of course. Money was tight, the work was physically demanding, and they had the normal adjustments any newlyweds face as they learned to share space and compromise and communicate. But there was also laughter and passion and a deep, abiding love that seemed to grow stronger with each passing month. Vincent was a patient, attentive husband, still carrying shadows from his past, but working through them with Willa's help. She, in turn, found herself healing in ways she had not expected. The wounds from Thomas's death slowly knitting closed as new memories with Vincent overlaid the painful ones. By summer, Willa suspected she was pregnant. She waited until she was certain before telling Vincent, nervous about how he would react given what had happened to Catherine. But when she finally said the words one evening as they sat watching the sunset from their porch, his face transformed with joy so pure it brought tears to her eyes. "Are you sure?" he asked, his hand immediately going to her still flat stomach. "As sure as I can be without a doctor. But yes, I think so. I think we are going to have a baby." Vincent pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe, and she felt his shoulders shaking. When he pulled back, his face was wet with tears. "I thought I would never get this chance again," he said, his voice breaking. "After Catherine, I thought this part of my life was over." "It is not over," Willa said, framing his face with her hands. "It is just beginning. We are going to have a family, Vincent. We are going to have everything we dreamed about." Their son was born in February of 1879, a healthy, loud baby boy with his father's blue eyes and his mother's determination. They named him Thomas Vincent Maddox, honoring both the man Willa had lost and the man she had found. Vincent cried when he held his son for the first time, overwhelmed with gratitude and love and relief that both Willa and the baby had survived the birth. Martha and Tom were frequent visitors in those early weeks, helping with the baby and the household chores while Willa recovered. Martha taught Willa everything she knew about caring for an infant, and Tom carved a beautiful cradle for his honorary grandson. The ranch hands stopped by to offer congratulations and leave small gifts, awkward with the baby but clearly pleased for Vincent and Willa. Watching Vincent with their son, Willa felt her heart could barely contain all the love she felt. He was a natural father, patient and gentle and completely devoted. He would walk the floor with Thomas when the baby was fussy, singing old cowboy songs in his rough voice. He changed diapers without complaining, helped with feedings, and stared at his son with such wonder that Willa would sometimes catch him just watching the baby sleep, tears sliding down his face. "What are you thinking?" she asked him one night, finding him like that, standing over the cradle in the dim light from the fireplace. "I am thinking about how close I came to missing this," Vincent said quietly. "If I had succeeded in getting myself killed 3 years ago, if Tom had not pulled me back, if you had given up in that desert, none of this would exist. This perfect, impossible, beautiful thing would not exist." Willa came to stand beside him, slipping her hand into his. "But we did not give up. We survived, and this is our reward." "This is more than a reward," Vincent said. "This is everything. You are everything." 2 years later, they welcomed a daughter, Catherine Willa Maddox, with her mother's dark hair and her father's smile. And 3 years after that, another son, Robert, named after Vincent's uncle. Their cabin grew with their family, Vincent adding rooms as needed, and their herd grew with careful management and hard work. The double T remained their anchor, with Tom and Martha aging gracefully and eventually leaving the ranch to Vincent and Willa when they passed within months of each other, both in their 70s and both seemingly ready to go. Vincent managed the combined operations with skill, hiring good men and treating them fairly, building a reputation as an honest rancher in a business that did not always value honesty. Willa never forgot Thomas, keeping his watch in a small box on her dresser, and sometimes telling their children about the man who had been part of her journey west, even if he had not lived to see the destination. But her life was full and happy, filled with love and laughter, and the daily work of building something meaningful. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Vincent took Willa back to the cottonwood grove where they had buried Thomas, where they had been married, where so much of their story had begun. The children were with a neighbor for the afternoon, and they had the rare luxury of time alone together. They stood together looking at the 2 graves there now. Thomas's marker, weathered but still standing, and beside it a newer stone for Catherine and her baby, moved from their original burial place in Santa Fe so Vincent could have them close. It had been Willa's idea, and Vincent had been overwhelmed by the gesture, by her understanding that he needed to honor his first family even as he built his second. "You think they would be proud of us?" Willa asked, her hand in Vincent's. "Do you think they would approve of the life we have built?" Vincent was quiet for a moment, then nodded. "I think they would. I think they would want exactly this for us. Love and family and a future that honors their memory by being fully lived." "I love you, Vincent Maddox," Willa said, turning to face him. "Thank you for stopping that day. Thank you for not riding past. Thank you for sitting beside me and sharing your story and pulling me back from the edge. I love you too, Willa. Thank you for saying yes. Thank you for taking a chance on a broken-down cowboy who thought he had nothing left to offer." He pulled her close, kissing her forehead. "Thank you for building this life with me." They stayed there for a while longer, honoring the past and the people they had lost, before riding back to their home and their children and their future. The sun was setting as they approached the ranch, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink and purple, and Willa thought about how far they had both come from those dark days in the desert. She had been ready to give up on everything, and he had sat beside her and shared his story, and in doing so, had given them both a reason to keep going. They had found each other in their lowest moments and built something beautiful from the ashes of their losses. And now, surrounded by their children and their land and the love they had fought so hard to claim, Willa knew with absolute certainty that every painful step had been worth it. Their story, born in tragedy and desperation, had become one of hope and healing and enduring love. And as they sat on their porch that evening, watching their children play in the yard while the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky, both Vincent and Willa understood that this ordinary, precious, hard-won life was everything they had ever needed. The years continued to unfold with all the joys and challenges that come with building a life in the rugged territory of New Mexico. Their children grew strong and capable, learning to ride before they could properly walk, understanding the rhythms of ranch life from their earliest memories. Thomas, their eldest, had his father's quiet strength and his mother's sharp mind. Catherine was fearless and bright, always the first to volunteer for any adventure. And young Robert was the peacemaker, gentle-hearted but tough when he needed to be. Vincent and Willa grew older together with grace, their love deepening into something that felt as essential as breathing. They had their disagreements, of course, moments of frustration or misunderstanding, but they had learned early in their marriage to talk through problems rather than let them fester. The foundation of shared trauma and hard-won happiness made them appreciate what they had too much to let small things drive them apart. As Fort Sumner grew and changed around them, as New Mexico moved toward statehood, as the Wild West gradually became less wild, Vincent and Willa remained constants in their community. They were known as fair employers, good neighbors, people who remembered what it meant to struggle and who extended help to others when they could. More than once, a drifter down on his luck would find work at the Maddox ranch, no questions asked, just as Vincent had once been given a second chance by Tom Hutchinson. When their children were grown and starting families of their own, when grandchildren began to arrive with regularity, Vincent and Willa would sometimes sit on their porch in the evenings and marvel at the life they had built. "Do you remember that day?" Willa would ask, and Vincent always knew exactly which day she meant. "Every detail," he would reply. "I remember seeing you sitting there in the dirt, looking like you had given up on everything. I remember thinking I should keep riding, that I had my own demons to deal with. But something made me stop." "I am glad you did," Willa would say, taking his weathered hand in hers. "I am glad you sat beside me. I am glad you shared your story. I am glad you reminded me that there was still life worth living." And they would sit together in comfortable silence, these two people who had found each other in the darkest moment and built a legacy of love that would extend through generations. Their story, which had begun with death and desperation in the New Mexico desert, had become a testament to the resilience of the human heart, to the power of compassion, and to the truth that sometimes the worst moments of our lives lead us exactly where we need to be.